Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Titan's edge and watched the alien ships appear above Mars. 3 years had passed since the Valorians came to Earth with their promises of peace and friendship. They brought medicine that cured diseases humanity had fought for centuries. They shared technology that solved the energy crisis and made space travel easier than anyone had dreamed possible. The tall, luminescent beings spoke beautiful words about unity and protection, warning Earth about the dangerous species lurking in deep space. The Valorians told stories about the Kryn Empire, savage warriors who conquered primitive worlds and enslaved entire populations. Earth listened and believed every word. Why would these elegant, peaceful aliens lie? They helped build defense stations around Earth and Mars. They trained human soldiers and upgraded weapon systems. President Helen Carter called it the greatest alliance in human history. Lisa Hayes commanded Sentinel-9, one of the orbital defense stations circling Earth. She trusted Commander Vecthar, the Valorian who worked beside her every day for 2 years. He seemed like a friend, always patient when explaining alien technology, always interested in human culture and history. Lisa never suspected that friendship could be a weapon sharper than any blade. The distress call from Europa changed everything. The mining colony sent a garbled transmission showing an attack in progress. Lisa expected to see the brutal Kryn warriors the Valorians always warned about. Instead, the attackers looked desperate and starving, using old broken weapons to steal supplies. They were Kryn, but not the monsters from Valorian stories. Daniel Cooper led the response team to Europa. His ship arrived to find the attack already over. The Kryn had fled, leaving behind 1 wounded warrior too injured to escape. The alien's name was Thex, and he spoke broken English learned from intercepted broadcasts. What he said made Daniel's blood run cold. The Valorians were not protectors. They were harvesters. Every species they helped, every civilization they guided, faced the same fate when the time was right. Once a world depended on Valorian technology and had trained enough soldiers, the harvest began. Populations were stripped away, warriors used as slaves to conquer the next target, resources stolen until nothing remained. The Kryn had believed Valorian promises 2 generations ago. Now they were scattered refugees hiding in the dark corners of space, trying to warn others before it was too late. Earth was nearly ready for harvest. Thex had risked everything to reach Europa and deliver this warning. He begged Daniel to investigate before it was too late. Jake Morrison did not want to believe such an impossible story. The Valorians had been nothing but helpful for 3 years. But Daniel brought evidence that could not be ignored. Satellite footage showed Valorian ships moving into new positions around major cities. Defense platforms supposedly protecting Earth were slowly turning their weapons inward, instead of outward. Small changes in behavior, supply shipments to strange locations, encrypted communications that human analysts could not decode. Lisa agreed to help investigate quietly. She accessed restricted areas of Sentinel-9 where Valorians worked alone. What she found made her sick. Files detailed harvest operations on 17 other worlds. Photos showed millions of beings packed into transport ships. Reports calculated the value of human resources, breaking down population by age and health status like cattle at auction. Daniel took a team to the moon to check the Valorian installations there. Underground storage facilities held rows of stasis pods, thousands upon thousands of them, enough to hold entire cities' worth of people. The transport ships in lunar orbit were not for colonization missions. They were for deportation. Everything humanity believed about their alien friends was a lie. The moment they were discovered snooping, the pretense ended. Commander Vecthar dropped his friendly mask like removing a costume. His voice turned cold and mechanical. The harvest fleet would arrive in 12 hours. Resistance would be met with total extermination. Cooperation would mean survival, though not freedom. Earth had one chance to surrender peacefully. President Carter received the message in her office in Washington. For 10 minutes she sat in silence, unable to process the betrayal. Then training took over. She activated every emergency protocol simultaneously. Military bases went to full alert. Evacuation plans began for major population centers. Every broadcast channel carried her message to the world. The truth seemed impossible, but the evidence was undeniable. Their alien friends were actually predators who had spent 3 years fattening humanity for slaughter. Panic swept through the streets, but there was no time for fear. Every soldier, every pilot, every person with any training reported for duty. Earth had 12 hours to prepare for a battle they could not win. General Marcus Webb took command of the Unified Defense Forces. The first problem was obvious and terrible. Every weapon system the Valorians had upgraded contained hidden code, kill switches that would disable Earth's defenses at the worst moment. Teams of programmers worked frantically to purge alien software and restore older independent systems. Earth would fight with primitive weapons against advanced technology, one arm tied behind their backs. Thex and his surviving Kryn offered to help. They knew Valorian tactics from decades of guerrilla warfare. The knowledge came with a dark truth. No species had ever successfully repelled a harvest fleet. The best hope was evacuating as many humans as possible and scattering across space like the Kryn had done. Survival meant abandoning Earth. Lisa refused to accept defeat without fighting. At Sentinel-9, her engineers worked with Kryn technicians to modify weapons. Brute force could not penetrate Valorian shields, but the Kryn knew about harmonic frequencies that disrupted their defenses. It was a tiny advantage, a crack in the armor, but it was something. Sophie Grant climbed into a fighter cockpit knowing she would probably die in the next day. Most of the volunteer pilots were civilians who learned to fly in the space program, never imagining they would face combat. They trained for 8 desperate hours, memorizing the weak points Thex identified in Valorian ships. Speed and surprise would be their only weapons. The harvest fleet arrived exactly on schedule. 300 massive vessels appeared simultaneously around Earth and Mars, emerging from warp points like sharks smelling blood. The flagship alone was larger than anything humanity had ever built. Commander Vekthar's voice echoed across every frequency with one final offer. Surrender meant servitude but survival. Resistance meant complete extermination of the human species. President Carter's response was broadcast to the fleet and to every human listening on Earth. Her voice was steady and clear. Humanity does not kneel. The words were simple, but they meant everything. Earth would fight and probably die, but they would do it standing up. The battle began with every orbital platform firing at once in coordinated volleys. The modified weapons punched through Valorian shields for brief moments, but the armor underneath held strong. Return fire came in devastating waves. 3 defense stations exploded in the opening minutes. Thousands of lives gone in flashes of light. The Titan's Edge charged toward the flagship with 5 other warships, their crews knowing this was likely a one-way trip. Jake Morrison coordinated the assault while his tactical officer Amy Parker called out targeting solutions. Every hit mattered. Every second bought time for evacuation ships fleeing Earth's surface. Civilian transports and mining haulers raced toward the outer system, desperate to reach the warp gates before they were sealed. The Valorians were not trying to destroy Earth yet, just break human resistance with precision strikes on military targets and command centers. The global defense network was crumbling under the assault. Earth had passed the point of no return. Either they found a miracle in the next few hours or humanity's story ended here. The Valorians adapted faster than anyone hoped. Within the first hour of battle, they adjusted their shields to compensate for the harmonic frequency weapons. Earth's small advantage evaporated like morning dew. Ships began falling from orbit in burning streaks across the sky. Sentinel-9 took a direct hit that breached the reactor core. Lisa Hayes ordered her crew to evacuate, but she stayed at her station, manually targeting one last salvo at the flagship's exposed engine cluster. The explosion took out 2 harvest ships before Sentinel-9 tore itself apart. Lisa never felt the end. On the ground in New York, Daniel Cooper organized civilian evacuations while dodging orbital bombardment. The Valorians were not trying to destroy cities yet, just break the will to fight with surgical strikes on military installations and government centers. Buildings collapsed into rubble. Fires raged through downtown streets. People ran in every direction, some toward evacuation points, others just running anywhere that seemed safer. General Webb made the hardest call of his military career. He ordered a fighting retreat from orbital space to focus all remaining resources on getting people off the planet. The survivors would scatter across the stars, preserve humanity in hidden colonies, maybe return someday to reclaim their homeworld. It felt like surrender dressed up as strategy. It felt like abandoning Earth to the enemy. Something unexpected happened in that darkest moment. New ships emerged from warp space, but they were not Valorian reinforcements. 17 vessels of completely different designs held position beyond the combat zone. They did not join the battle, just watched with sensors trained on the desperate struggle below. Jake Morrison received a transmission identifying them as the Accord, a loose alliance of species that had escaped or resisted Valorian expansion over the centuries. Ambassador Krell spoke for the Accord. His voice was deep and rumbling like stones grinding together. The bear-like being explained, they had monitored Earth since the Valorians made first contact. They waited to see how humanity would respond to the inevitable betrayal. Most species collapsed immediately or fled into the void. Humanity chose to stand and fight despite impossible odds. That choice caught the Accord's attention. The offer seemed simple, but the conditions were brutal. The Accord would intervene and save Earth, but only if humanity proved worthy first. In the next 30 minutes, human forces had to destroy one Valorian heavy cruiser without any outside help. Do that and the Accord would consider humanity worth saving. Fail on Earth would face extinction alone. It seemed impossible. The fleet was scattered and depleted. Weapons were failing. Ammunition ran low. But Jake Morrison realized the Accord was not testing military strength. They were testing creativity and determination, the willingness to sacrifice everything for survival. He contacted every surviving ship and ground station with a plan that made sense, only because they had nothing left to lose. Sophie Grant rallied the remaining fighter squadrons for one coordinated strike. Instead of attacking shields head-on, they would hide in the debris field from destroyed ships, using the wreckage as cover to get close enough for point-blank shots at the shield generators. Most pilots would die, but a few might succeed. Every volunteer knew the odds and flew anyway. Dr. Kevin Shaw was a civilian physicist trapped in a bunker under Colorado. He had been studying gravitational physics before the invasion turned his research into a weapon. He proposed using Earth's remaining nuclear missiles in an unconventional way, detonate them in a precise pattern to create cascading gravitational distortions. The artificial gravity well would pull the target cruiser into Earth's atmosphere, where it would burn up like a meteor. Jake Morrison combined both approaches into one desperate gambit. Grant's fighters would damage the cruiser's maneuvering thrusters so it could not escape. The nuclear missiles would create the gravity trap. The Titan's Edge and two limping corvettes would provide cover, drawing fire from the cruiser's escort vessels. Every piece had to work perfectly or they would fail the test and doom their species. The plan executed with desperate precision. Sophie's squadron lost 70% of their fighters in the approach. Valorian point defense systems shredded the small craft, but a few got through. Explosions rippled across the cruiser's hull as its maneuvering capability died. The massive ship began drifting, unable to compensate for orbital mechanics. The nuclear missiles launched in a carefully timed sequence from silos across 3 continents. Their detonations were invisible in the vacuum, but their gravitational effects were immediately apparent. Space itself bent around the stricken cruiser. The vessel tried to fire engines that no longer responded. It began an uncontrolled descent toward the atmosphere. The Valorian commander attempted to evacuate his crew, but Jake had anticipated that move. Every human ship focused fire on the escape pods. It was a dark, necessary choice that would haunt survivors forever. The pods exploded one by one until none remained. The cruiser hit atmosphere and friction tore it apart. The reactor detonated in a brilliant flash visible from the ground, a second sun burning for just a moment. Ambassador Krell's voice returned with what might have been approval or might have been surprise. Humanity passed the first test by proving they could think tactically under pressure and make terrible choices when necessary. The Accord would intervene now, but there was a second condition that could not be negotiated. Humanity had to understand what they were joining. This was not a rescue that ended with peace and safety. The Accord fought an eternal struggle against Valorian expansion that had lasted thousands of years and consumed countless civilizations. They were not powerful enough to defeat the enemy outright. If they were, the war would have ended long ago. They could only fight holding actions, create temporary safe zones, preserve targeted species for as long as possible. By accepting Accord help, humanity became permanent enemies of the most powerful empire in known space. Earth would forever look over its shoulder, always waiting for the next attack. President Carter broadcast from her bunker deep beneath Denver. Her response came without hesitation. Humanity already made its choice when it decided to fight rather than submit to harvest. There was no going back regardless of what happened next. She accepted the Accord's terms and all the dangers that came with them. The Accord fleet engaged the Valorian harvest ships with weapons and tactics refined over millennia of asymmetric warfare. They did not try to destroy the entire fleet. That would bring overwhelming retaliation from the Valorian Empire. Instead, they crippled enough vessels to force a tactical retreat, creating a brief window for human evacuation to continue. Commander Vekthar had one final card to play. As his damaged flagship prepared to withdraw, he deployed a weapon the Valorians never revealed to their supposed human friends. The planet killer looked small and unimpressive, just a metal sphere that dropped toward Earth's surface. But once it burrowed into the crust and reached the mantle, it would crack the planet like an egg. If the Valorians could not harvest humanity, they would ensure no one else could have them either. The device was already active, drilling down through rock and magma. Detonation would occur in 6 hours. The Accord had no counter for this weapon. They admitted defeat before the battle even started. Earth was lost. All they could do was evacuate as many humans as possible before the end. Ambassador Krell's voice carried genuine regret. Humanity fought well, but some weapons simply could not be stopped. Jake Morrison refused to accept that answer. Humanity had one advantage the ancient advanced species of the Accord lacked. They were young and reckless and desperate. They had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. There had to be a way to stop the planet killer. There had to be something the enemy had not considered. Somewhere in Earth's vast store of knowledge and human stubborn creativity, an answer existed. They just had 6 hours to find it. Dr. Eleanor Price had been studying Earth's core dynamics from a research facility in Iceland when the invasion began. Her seismic monitoring equipment tracked the Valorian device as it burrowed through the crust. She understood immediately what it was designed to do. The planet killer would trigger a catastrophic chain reaction in Earth's tectonic system, tearing the world apart from within like pulling a thread that unravels an entire sweater. The Accord believed the weapon was unstoppable because it was shielded by advanced technology and buried, too deep for any weapon to reach. But Eleanor saw something they missed. The device's placement was perfect for destroying Earth, but that same placement made it vulnerable to the planet's own natural forces if those forces could be properly directed. She contacted Jake Morrison with a theory that sounded insane, even by the standards of the last 24 hours. Earth's core was already a massive nuclear reactor, generating heat through radioactive decay. If they could trigger a precisely controlled pressure release in the mantle, they could create a convective plume of superheated material that would engulf the Valorian device. The intense heat and pressure would either destroy it or force it back to the surface where it could be dealt with. The problem was triggering such a release without finishing what the Valorians started and destroying the planet themselves. It would require detonating every remaining nuclear weapon Earth possessed at specific points along tectonic boundaries. The explosions would create artificial earthquakes that propagated through the mantle in a controlled pattern. The margin for error was essentially zero. Miscalculate by even a fraction of a percent and they would accomplish the enemy's goal for them. Jake brought the proposal to Ambassador Krell, expecting immediate rejection. Instead, the ancient warrior was intrigued. In 10,000 years of Accord history, no species had ever attempted something so audacious. They always accepted the loss of homeworlds as inevitable, focusing on preserving populations. Humanity wanted to weaponize their own planet against an enemy device. The sheer reckless creativity was almost beautiful. The Accord provided computational power to model the complex physics involved. Kryn engineers who survived their own planet's destruction worked alongside human geologists to refine the detonation sequence. They had 4 hours to plan something that should take years of research and testing. There would be no practice run, no margin for error, no second chances. Lieutenant Brian Hayes was a demolitions expert who spent his career learning to blow things up safely. Now he coordinated placing nuclear devices at 17 locations around the globe. Most sites were in remote areas, but 3 required deploying warheads in or near major cities that had not been fully evacuated. Millions of people would die in the earthquakes even if the plan worked perfectly. It was a trolley problem scaled up to planetary size. President Carter made the announcement herself. Every human on Earth had a choice. Evacuate on the Accord transports or stay and help implement the plan. No one would be forced to remain and face the apocalypse. She expected mass panic and a desperate stampede for the ships. The evacuation fleet could maybe save 30% of Earth's population if people moved in an orderly fashion. Something remarkable happened instead. Volunteers flooded communication channels offering to help with the nuclear placement operation. Scientists and soldiers and ordinary civilians worked together knowing they probably would not survive. Families said goodbye. Parents put children on evacuation ships, then returned to help. The Accord observers were stunned. Most species fragmented in their final hours, turning on each other in desperate attempts at individual survival. Humanity was coming together. Sophie Grant flew one of the final delivery missions carrying a nuclear device to a volcanic system in Indonesia. Her fighter had been damaged in the earlier battle, leaking fuel and barely holding together. She knew she would not make it back to orbit before the detonation sequence began. She landed anyway and helped the ground team install the device. She recorded a message for her family, told them she loved them, then accepted what came next. With 1 hour remaining, all 17 devices were in position. Dr. Eleanor Price entered the authorization code that would begin the sequence. The nuclear detonations would occur in a precise cascade, each triggering geological responses that would amplify through Earth's mantle over the next 40 minutes. If the calculations were correct, a massive convective plume would form directly beneath the Valorian device, engulfing it at exactly the moment it reached critical activation. The first detonation occurred beneath the Pacific Ocean. Tsunamis radiated outward in all directions, but that was the least of Earth's concerns now. Seismic stations registered the shock wave propagating through the mantle exactly as predicted. The second and third detonations followed in Nevada and Kazakhstan. The pattern was building according to plan. Jake Morrison watched from the Titan's edge, barely operational but still holding orbit. He refused to evacuate, determined to see this through whether they succeeded or failed. His skeleton crew remained with him. If Earth died today, they would witness its final moments. That seemed important somehow, that someone should be watching. The earthquakes hit in rolling waves as the nuclear pattern completed. Cities already devastated by the Valorian attack suffered additional destruction. The Accord evacuation ships worked frantically to rescue people in the impact zones, but millions were beyond saving. The human cost of this desperate plan was staggering, yet still preferable to total extinction. Sometimes there were no good choices, only less terrible ones. At the 38-minute mark, Eleanor detected the convective plume forming deep in the mantle. Superheated material was rising toward the Valorian device faster than even her most optimistic projections. The planet itself was responding to humanity's desperate gambit. Earth was fighting back against the thing trying to kill it. The Valorian device detected the approaching threat and attempted to accelerate its detonation sequence. But it was too late. The convective plume engulfed the weapon, and for one terrifying moment nothing happened. Seismic readings went chaotic. Eleanor's screens filled with data that made no sense. Then she understood. The device was being torn apart by forces it was never designed to withstand. The planet killer built to destroy worlds was being destroyed by the world it targeted. The device erupted from the ocean floor near the Mariana Trench, ejected by geological pressure like a cork from a champagne bottle. It was a twisted mass of melted metal, completely inactive. The threat was eliminated. The countdown stopped with 42 minutes remaining. Earth survived, but the cost was terrible. Perhaps a quarter of the human population died in the battle and the geological chaos that followed. Entire coastlines were drowned. Volcanic eruptions altered weather patterns that would take decades to stabilize. The planet was scarred and broken, but they won. Humanity accomplished something the Accord had never seen. They beat the Valorians' ultimate weapon and kept their homeworld. Earth remained in human hands. Ambassador Krell contacted Jake with a message that would define humanity's future. Welcome to the Accord, but you should understand what this victory means. The Valorians will never forgive this humiliation. They will pursue humanity across the stars for generations. Every human colony, every ship, every scattered fragment of the species will be hunted. Was keeping one planet worth eternal war? Jake Morrison's response was immediate and unflinching. Ask us again after you have lost your homeworld. Earth is not just a planet. It is proof that we cannot be broken. It is proof that determination matters more than technology. It is proof that even the weakest can win if they refuse to surrender. The Valorians retreated, but everyone knew they would return. Next time would be different. Next time they would come prepared for human creativity and desperation. Next time, They would bring enough force to ensure total victory. Earth had perhaps a decade before the second invasion arrived. 6 months after the invasion, Earth still trembled from the wounds inflicted on it. Earthquakes rumbled through tectonic zones as the planet's systems tried to stabilize from the massive intervention. Coastal cities lay drowned beneath rising seas. Volcanic eruptions had thrown ash into the atmosphere, dimming sunlight and disrupting agriculture. Winter came early and stayed late. But humanity survived, and with the Accord's help, they were rebuilding. Jake Morrison wore the rank of Admiral now, commanding Earth's restructured defense fleet. The Titan's Edge had been repaired and upgraded with Accord technology, joined by ships gifted from various member species. Humanity was no longer fighting alone, but they were still the newest and most vulnerable members of the Alliance. Everyone knew the Valorians would return, and next time they would not underestimate their prey. The Kryn refugees received asylum on Earth, settling in devastated regions where human populations were slow to return. Thex and his people brought knowledge of agriculture adapted for harsh environments and construction techniques that worked in unstable terrain. Former enemies became partners in recovery, united by shared experience of Valorian betrayal. Children who once feared alien monsters now played with Kryn younglings in the ruins. Dr. Eleanor Price became Earth's liaison to the Accord scientific community. Her success in weaponizing planetary geology earned respect from species that studied physics for millennia before humans discovered fire. She now led research initiatives developing new defensive strategies based on humanity's unconventional approach to impossible problems. The Accord was learning from Earth as much as Earth learned from them. But victory came with costs beyond physical damage. Valorian diplomatic networks spread throughout the galaxy, painting humanity as dangerous fanatics who would rather destroy their own planet than accept peaceful integration. The propaganda was effective. Several Accord species expressed concerns about humanity's willingness to take catastrophic risks. What if humans turned those same desperate tactics against allies someday? Sophie Grant survived her suicide mission through a combination of impossible luck and timely rescue by Accord ships. She now trained new fighter pilots, teaching them the aggressive tactics humanity developed during the battle. The old defensive doctrines were gone, replaced by a philosophy of rapid, overwhelming response to any threat. Hit first, hit hard, never give the enemy time to think. Earth's government restructured under President Helen Carter's leadership. The old national divisions seemed petty after facing extinction together. A unified planetary government emerged, focused solely on survival and preparation for the inevitable Valorian return. Every decision was made through a single lens. Can we defend against the next attack? Everything else was secondary. The Accord warned that Valorian retribution would come, but not immediately. The Harvest Fleet's defeat was a massive embarrassment that required careful political maneuvering within Valorian society. They would spend years rebuilding forces and planning a second assault that left no room for human resistance. Earth had perhaps a decade to prepare for round 2, maybe less. Jake used that time to transform humanity's entire military doctrine. He studied every recorded Valorian battle available in Accord archives, learning their patterns and preferences. He realized the Valorians' greatest weakness was arrogance. They expected primitive species to fight in predictable, conventional ways. Humanity's advantage lay in constant innovation and complete unpredictability. Never do the same thing twice. Never fight fair when you can fight smart. Daniel Cooper led the expansion of human colonies beyond Earth. Instead of concentrating population on one world, humanity spread across the solar system and beyond, establishing hidden settlements in asteroid fields and on moons of gas giants. Underground bunkers on Mars held genetic banks and cultural archives. If the Valorians wanted to exterminate humanity, they would have to hunt down every scattered fragment across hundreds of locations. The Accord was impressed, but concerned. Humanity adopted a strategy of distributed survival that prioritized species preservation over territorial control. It was the same path the Kryn took, and it led to generations of nomadic existence without a true home. Ambassador Krell warned that Earth risked losing its cultural identity in the dispersion. A species scattered across the stars often forgot what made them unique. But humanity learned a crucial lesson from the invasion. Survival trumped everything else. Pride and tradition and conventional wisdom were luxuries they could no longer afford. Every child now grew up learning emergency evacuation procedures and basic spacecraft operation. It was a traumatized generation, but also a prepared one. They would never be caught helpless again. Dr. Kevin Shaw, whose gravitational cascade saved Earth, worked on even more extreme defensive measures. If Valorians returned with overwhelming force, humanity needed options that could buy time for evacuation. His new projects included destabilizing star systems, weaponizing dark matter, and creating artificial wormholes. The Accord found these proposals terrifying, which gave Jake confidence they might actually work against the enemy. 3 years after the invasion, Valorian scout ships began appearing at the edges of Accord space. They probed defenses, gathered intelligence, tested response times. The second invasion was coming, and it would make the first look like a warning shot. Ambassador Krell estimated they had 2 years at most before the full assault began. Maybe less if the Valorians decided humanity posed enough threat to accelerate their timeline. Jake called a meeting of the Accord Military Council with a proposal that shocked the assembled species. Instead of waiting for Valorians to attack, humanity would strike first. Not at the main fleet, but at supply lines and support infrastructure. Hit-and-run raids that disrupted their preparation and forced them to defend multiple fronts simultaneously. Keep them off balance and unable to focus overwhelming force on Earth. The Accord was horrified. For thousands of years they fought defensively, trying to preserve what they had rather than risk offensive operations. Humanity proposed an escalation that could provoke the Valorians into genocidal retaliation against all Accord species. The ancient alliance might not survive the fallout from human aggression. Jake's response was blunt and unapologetic. They are already planning to exterminate us. What exactly do we have to lose by fighting back? Defensive warfare just lets the enemy choose when and where to strike. Offensive operations force them to react to us instead. It changes the entire dynamic of the conflict. The vote split the Accord, but enough species were desperate enough to approve limited offensive operations. Humanity would lead the raids, taking the greatest risks, while Accord forces provided support and logistics. If it failed, blame would fall on the reckless humans. If it succeeded, it might change the balance of power in the galaxy for the first time in millennia. Amy Parker commanded the first strike mission against a Valorian supply depot in neutral space. The raid was textbook guerrilla warfare, fast insertion with stealth craft, maximum destruction using shape charges and electromagnetic pulse weapons, immediate withdrawal before reinforcements arrived. 3 Valorian logistics ships were destroyed before their escorts could respond. Humanity announced its presence as an active threat, not just a defensive holdout. The Valorian response was predictable. Outrage and promises of total annihilation. But propaganda could not hide a new reality emerging. For the first time in their long history of expansion, the Valorians faced an enemy that refused to play by established rules. Humanity was not trying to match their technology or win conventional battles. They fought dirty, exploited every weakness, embraced tactics more civilized species considered beneath them. The prey had become predators, and the predators did not know how to respond. 5 years after first contact, humanity prepared for the second invasion with grim determination. The anniversary was not celebrated. It was marked quietly by those who remembered the day their alien friends revealed themselves as enemies. Earth's defenses were stronger now. The scattered colonies were self-sufficient. The Accord alliance was more unified than it had been in centuries. But everyone knew the Valorians would come with overwhelming force this time. The raids continued across Valorian space. Small human strike teams hit supply convoys, communication relays, isolated outposts. Each attack was carefully planned to maximize damage while minimizing risk of capture. The Valorians could not predict where humanity would strike next. For an empire used to crushing opposition through sheer superiority, the constant harassment was infuriating. Ambassador Krell met with Jake Morrison as reports of successful operations accumulated. The ancient Ursid warrior had seen countless species rise and fall over his long lifetime. Something about humanity puzzled him in ways he struggled to articulate. "Why do you fight so aggressively?" he asked. "Your world is safe for now. You could focus on building strength for the inevitable final battle." Jake looked out at Earth through the viewport, scarred but healing, because we learned something the day they arrived. The only true enemy is not the Valorians or any other empire. It is the belief that we are too weak to determine our own fate. Every species that submitted to harvest believed they had no choice. We prove there is always a choice, even if it is a terrible one. "And if that choice leads to your extinction," Krell asked. "Then at least we went down fighting," Jake replied. but I do not think it will. The Valorians are used to harvesting sheep. They have never faced wolves before. The second Valorian fleet arrived without warning on a Tuesday morning. This time there were no negotiations, no offers of surrender, no pretense of civilization. 5,000 ships emerged from warp space around Earth, and every major human colony simultaneously. The Valorians learned from their first defeat. They would not give humanity time to organize desperate plans or pull off impossible victories. This would be overwhelming annihilation. But humanity learned from that first battle too. The defense network activated instantly. Every ship, every station, every hidden weapons platform opened fire in coordinated volleys. Mines seeded throughout the orbital approaches detonated in cascading chains. Kinetic kill vehicles launched from the moon at a significant fraction of light speed. The Valorians expected resistance, but not this level of prepared ferocity. The battle was brutal from the first moment. Valorian ships died in the hundreds, but thousands more kept coming. Human losses mounted rapidly. The Titan's Edge took damage that would have destroyed it in the first invasion, but Accord upgrades kept it fighting. Jake coordinated the defense while knowing it was ultimately futile. They were buying time, nothing more. Evacuation fleets launched from Earth carrying the last civilians. Most of the population had already dispersed to hidden colonies, but millions remained unwilling or unable to leave their homeworld. Transport ships fled in every direction, hoping some would escape the net. Valorian interceptors hunted them ruthlessly. Sophie Grant led the fighter screen protecting the evacuation routes. Her squadron tangled with Valorian craft in a desperate running battle across Earth's orbital space. For every enemy destroyed, 2 more appeared. Her pilots were outnumbered 50-1, but they kept fighting because every minute mattered. Every transport that escaped was a victory. Then the Accord fleet arrived in force. Not just the 17 ships that intervened before, but hundreds of vessels from dozens of species. The ancient alliance had been preparing for this moment for 5 years. They could not match Valorian numbers, but they brought technology and tactics refined over millennia. The battlefield transformed into chaos as 3-way combat erupted. Eleanor Price worked from a bunker beneath Colorado, coordinating defensive systems and monitoring seismic activity. The Valorians were bombarding tectonic weak points, trying to trigger the same geological instability Earth weaponized against their planet killer. She rerouted power to kinetic dampeners at critical fault lines, sacrificing defense platforms to prevent earthquakes. Earth itself had become part of the battle. Daniel Cooper commanded ground forces defending the last major population centers. Valorian dropships landed invasion forces in a dozen cities. The enemy was no longer content with orbital bombardment. They wanted to prove humans could be beaten on their own soil. The urban warfare was vicious. Human defenders used every dirty trick, every improvised weapon, every advantage of knowing the terrain. They made the invaders pay for every block. The Valorians brought a new weapon to this battle. Bioweapons designed specifically for human physiology, created from the medical data they collected during the 3 years of false friendship. Plague swept through refugee camps and military bases. Doctors struggled to treat diseases they had never seen before. The enemy was trying to defeat humanity through every possible means simultaneously, but humanity had its own surprises. Kevin Shaw's experimental weapons finally saw deployment. A dark matter bomb detonated inside a Valorian formation, creating a localized gravitational anomaly that crushed 100 ships like tin cans. Artificial wormholes opened in unexpected locations, allowing human raiders to strike Valorian command vessels from impossible angles. The rules of warfare were being rewritten in real time. The battle raged for 3 days. Earth's surface was devastated worse than the first invasion. Entire continents burned. The death toll climbed into the billions, but humanity refused to break. Every time the Valorians thought they had victory in hand, humans pulled off another impossible counterattack. The prey would not die quietly. On the 4th day, something shifted in the Valorian fleet. Their formations became defensive. Ships began withdrawing to secure positions. Intercepted communications revealed growing dissent among their command structure. The Harvest Fleet was supposed to be a quick, overwhelming strike. It had turned into a grinding war of attrition that the Valorians were actually losing ships and resources faster than projections allowed. The political calculation that justified this invasion was collapsing. Valorian leadership back home demanded results. The fleet commander had promised easy victory and delivered costly stalemate. Other Accord species, emboldened by humanity's resistance, began launching their own raids on Valorian territory. The Empire faced the possibility of general uprising across their sphere of influence. Ambassador Krell received a communication on secure Accord channels. Valorian Diplomatic Corps was requesting negotiations through intermediaries, not surrender, nothing so dramatic, but a ceasefire to discuss terms. The Empire wanted a way to disengage without appearing weak. Jake Morrison's response was clear and uncompromising. Humanity would accept nothing less than complete Valorian withdrawal from Earth and all human colonies. Recognition of human sovereignty, reparations for the damage inflicted, and a binding treaty enforced by the Accord preventing any future harvest attempts. The terms were harsh but fair. The Valorians could accept them and save face, or they could continue fighting a war they were no longer certain they could win. The negotiations took 2 weeks. The ceasefire held by a thread. Finally, an agreement was reached. Earth would remain independent under Accord protection. The Valorians withdrew their fleets and paid reparations in technology and resources. Humanity secured the right to continue expanding across the stars without interference. It was not total victory. The Valorian Empire remained powerful and hostile, but for the first time in their history of conquest, they backed down. They accepted that one species was too costly to harvest, too dangerous to provoke, too stubborn to break. Earth began rebuilding again, this time with genuine allies and hard-won respect. The scars would take generations to heal. The trauma would echo through human culture forever. But they won. Against impossible odds, against superior technology, against an empire that had never known defeat. Humanity forced the enemy to accept peace. Jake stood on the rebuilt bridge of the Titan's edge, looking down at Earth. The planet was battered and broken, but still turning, still alive. Ambassador Krell's question echoed in his memory. Was it worth the cost? Yes, Jake thought, because now every species in the galaxy knows the truth. Humanity does not kneel. We do not surrender. We do not accept fate handed down by those who think themselves superior. We make our own fate, no matter how impossible the odds. The day the Valorians arrived from the stars thinking they found easy prey became the day humanity proved it belonged among the wolves, not the sheep. The true enemy was never the empire that came to harvest them. It was the belief that they were too weak to fight back. That belief died the day Earth refused to surrender, and in its place rose something the galaxy had not seen in millennia, a young species that understood the brutal truth of the cosmos and refused to be broken by it.